Hey, this is Mr. Goebel. I'd like to remind everyone that just before you start going through this review, that you check out the webpage. Guys, good luck. The test is easy, and remember, guys, no sweat it. It's all easy stuff. Okay, so for Mr. Goebel, here we go. Yes. Hey, Mr. Goebel here. Now, before you take this test, remember, check online, check for my online resources, and remember, guys, this is all easy stuff. So here we go. So remember, with any test review, I told you I would look through the actual test items, the test words. In this case, I'm going to do that very thing. But remember, there are a lot of resources out there. This is one right here I'd like you to check out. So here we go. A little intro.
As the Roaring Twenties were drawing to an end, so too was an era of relative prosperity for many Americans. As early as 1926, the construction of new housing had decreased. Businesses had too much inventory and too few buyers. Nevertheless, an optimistic America wanted to believe that the good times would last forever, pointing to fortunes that were being made on the stock market. Even people with little money to spare wanted in on the action, and stockbrokers readily agreed to sell shares on margin, where they would lend citizens money to buy stock. These investors figured the stock's price was bound to go up and up, allowing them to pay back the stock's original price tenfold. The constantly rising price of stocks cast a spell over the nation. Noon-hour traffic stood still as people eagerly awaited news of their improved finances. Even distinguished Yale University economist Irving Fisher made a bold speculation.
The nation is marching along a permanently high plateau of prosperity.
But the simple fact was that the price paid for many stocks was unduly out of proportion to the actual profitability of the companies who issued them, creating the illusion of increase.
As the 1920s roll along, the real issues were kind of ignored by economists, including the presidents of that time. Even though they knew that farmers were hurting, presidents like Hoover, when he's elected in 1928, which we'll come back to in just a second, we're kind of ignoring the fact that the agriculture was in a really serious bind. They thought literally that prosperity would continue pretty much forever, and this idea kind of was in the mindset of most of these early leaders, like Hoover. Hoover basically was a man that believed in keeping yourself up. You basically pull yourself out of your own problems. This rugged individualist that he basically thought Americans should evolve into, just like him as a growing kid, as an orphan as he grew up. But it didn't mask the fact that massive amounts of deflation was going on when farmers would go to sell their produce. The deflation was a combination of a lot of things: the lack of customers overseas, and also an overproduction issue. Farmers were just really good at doing what they needed, what they were able to do. They were getting better. Mechanization was improving their productivity. So the government stepped in with little ideas such as parity. Parity is the idea that you would just match lowering prices with taking excess product off the market. So he worked with farm cooperatives to try to reduce the price, or to try to reduce the volume that they were producing. They also provided subsidies. Subsidy is a payment for something that you don't want somebody to produce. So you said, hey, if you don't produce this, I will give you a certain amount of a subsidy to not do that, to do that behavior, which would adjust artificially the market. When these things didn't work, more and more foreclosures on farms resulted. Probably probably another thing that kind of led insult to injury to farmers was the Dust Bowl, and that photograph behind me basically illustrates the Dust Bowl, land that was once semi-arid, could be used to farm with just a minimal amount of rain. Well, if you got a little bit of climactic conditions that would result in a drying of those temperatures, the Dust Bowl resulted. You can see the soils were being blown around at in this farm. You can see the height of it. I mean, there's soil there in that photograph, almost 3-4 feet to the level of that car, and you can see the wheels of basically under that farm wagon, basically under sand that had been blown around. So those were things that affected the agricultural side of the Great Depression. It was multi-phased. It was agricultural. It was financial, and then eventually that led to a breakdown of people's trust in the economic system. The next phase I want to talk about is the ideas around some of the mechanics of why the markets and why the economy did what it did. There are several factors that are pulling on the market, other than international factors. These are business factors. So the graphic behind me is what we call the business cycle. The cycle of business, and there are many things. There are many things that basically are part of that business cycle. So we're going to look at those parts really quick, and they're labeled up there. And I'm reading right off of the matching section of your test. So the business cycle starts just like a roller coaster with a period of prosperity, and that period of prosperity, of course, gets people excited about being in the economy. It's kind of like the beginning of a roller coaster. Everybody's excited about the trip that they're going to be on. So this period of prosperity, of upward trend above what he called the line of equilibrium. Following prosperity could, if there is enough and the economy gets overheated, there could be a period of recession, which is about 6 months of a downturn of the economy. Prices basically maybe increase, goods or availability might decrease. There are a lot of things that can affect the downturn of an economy. It could be inflation. It could be a lot of different factors. People just not wanting to buy anymore. They get tired of things. Maybe people just are just changing their habits. But it could lead to what we call a slight downturn or a recession. The recession, if it goes on long enough, can lead to something that's deeper and longer, which is a depression. Depression is a longer version of this negative business cycle. Of course, economic activity would slow down, and in a depression, it would literally almost halt, just like in 1929 to about 1937, 38. The economy really became stagnant, and it was dependent on a lot of other things. If you start to recover from that, of course, that's the next phase. Recovery is when you start to get that economy moving again. It starts to change direction. Going from recession to depression to now an upswing in people's excitement to get back into the market, or wanting to build a house, or wanting to buy something. You get more consumer confidence as a result of that. So there's two other charts that kind of help this business cycle. One is the supply and demand of things has an effect on that. How much is available versus how much people want it. Versus the idea also of gaining inflation, of rising prices, or deflation, which is lowering of prices. So there's our supply and demand curve right there. That's that little X. And of course, what consumers want is to reach equilibrium, where your price basically matches what people want to pay for things. But remember the business cycle. All right. So going away from now the business aspects, that maybe affected more farming. Now, we could probably understand this a little bit in the terms of a farmer or a manufacturer, but it doesn't tell us the economic issue based upon the investing and banking. So the next phase that we want to talk about here in our little discussion review is this idea that happy days are here again, and there's nothing I can do wrong. Money is just falling out of trees, or over speculation as to the economy, and that's really what was going on. People thought it had very. I guess it didn't mean that people didn't have the ability to understand it. It's just that the nature of what would happen had never happened before. Speculation is basically guessing. You're guessing as to the rising or falling of prices. That over speculation, and of course, people that we're doing another economic activity that can lead to negativity is buying on margin. Margin buying is basically people using small amounts of investment capital to receive loans from banks, and banks were very competitive at giving investors money because they were making money too. So there was a lot of greed involved. You had investors that weren't very skilled, that were, especially as we got later into before the market crash, you had people that really had never invested in the market before, taking a lot of risky chances, and of course that driving the prices up even further. Stressing out banks. Remember, banks are wanting to get involved too. They're making money as well. All this stuff comes to a head on an event, we call Black Tuesday. Black Tuesday is when all these risky behaviors started to create a sell-off in the market. People that were more experienced first started to sell off their stocks, and of course, this created a snowball effect, an emotional effect. People started to panic, and the market continued into free fall, and up to $30 billion were lost on a single day. Nobody took more of the brunt of the blame than President Hoover. When the market crashes in 1929, he's only in the office of the presidency. He only holds it for about 6 months. And of course, he bears all the brunt of the recovery. Look at some of the headlines: the crash, panic, all these words that came out. Guys, it's very hard to get people to change their minds as soon as they decided that getting out is something they needed to do. So this graphic shows the extent of the free fall and some of the information that people basically were fed in the newspapers that day. And of course that, I like this up here, final edition, like there'll never be a newspaper ever again. So these are the kinds of things that Hoover was dealing with. Hoover was dealing with the emotions of this. Was he solely responsible? Well, if you walk into a problem and you happen to be the first one into the door, sometimes you get all the responsibility, which he did. Hoover had 4 years to try to fix it, and it was such a deep depression, and during those 4 years, it was literally irreversible. With the economy in free fall, of course, people lost confidence. The average everyday person that wasn't an investor lost confidence in the banks. This is an example of a bank run down here. A bank run is a time where basically is an event where people basically lose so much confidence in their bank that they literally rush there to pull all their money out. No single bank has all of its depositors' money in it. And these banks that were giving out bad loans, many of those were under stress of closing, and what a bank run would do would ensure it's closing forever. So many of these people standing in this line would never get their money back. Another thing that business does as a result of a downturning economy is they lay off workers. These are two men that basically are wearing their resumes on their self to basically show people, hey, this is the skill I have. This is what you can do. This is what I can do. This is what I can do to help you. The other thing affectionately basically tag that was given for Hoover is this idea of a Hooverville. And behind me is an example of what we call a Hooverville. A Hooverville is a shanty town, or a shanty built, many shanties together built to house people. You can't pay your rent, so you go into a dump and you find what you can, and you build yourself a temporary shelter so you can, if I have a place to be warm as you're looking for jobs. This guy here is sitting there all calmly reading a newspaper. You got this cat here, and you've got this really just thrown together a bunch of a bunch of cardboard boxes and wooden crates and pictures and things to basically live in. So quite interesting. He looks like it's pretty normal. So more effects of the Great Depression. Many of these were very visible, and Hoover was taking a huge amount of criticism. As the 1930s are ushered in, so would FDR's New Deal. Hoover was easily defeated in the election of 1932. Like I told a lot of people, there wasn't a lot for him to do because of taking full blame. And of course, his policies not being aggressive enough, his idea that people were responsible for themselves, his idea of his rugged individualism was not working. And of course, the economy had just stalled out. So when Roosevelt would take office, his philosophy was basically right there: try something, try anything, and of course bring some people in that could look beyond or look differently than earlier people looked into as to trying to fix the economy. There was a lot of attempts by Hoover to do things, especially with the agriculture. But it was a little bit too late. So when Roosevelt would come in, he would believe that there would be drastic measures that were needed. One of the things was to stop the bank runs. So he declared things called bank holidays. Bank holidays are temporary closures of banks to get people to think and to react less and get information before that bank would basically go under, because once the bank goes under, your money's gone. There was no protections under the law when it came to banks. So when the New Deal basically is put into action, many people would be involved. One would be one of the Roosevelt's brain trust was a woman named Frances Perkins. She's given a lot of credit for the drafting of the ideas of the New Deal. Another is a economist named John Maynard Keynes. Keynes believed that government needed to be more involved in the recovery, that it wasn't pick yourself up by your bootstraps, but the government needed to infuse money into it. I described that as being a trickle-up kind of economy, or what they call supply-side economics. And Keynes was kind of the architect of that, a British guy. So we've got a woman and a British guy, a foreigner, basically helping us with the recovery of the United States, and of course FDR leading this brain trust. So his three main focuses were relief, recovery, and reform. Relief for people that directly needed it. Recovery, basically to get the economy back moving, to get it to basically get it jump started, and reforms to keep things from happening ever again. Probably the most controversial thing that came out of the New Deal is this idea of deficit spending. The government would spend a lot of money. It would borrow a lot of money from itself and infuse that money into the economy through programs, which I'll talk about in a second. The other thing that Roosevelt did was he spoke a lot using social media, using radio. He was a master of the media, and his fireside chats were part of that. He basically discussions with people saying, hey, everything's okay. The government's working on it. We're all in this together. We're all going to get out of this together. We all made the mistake together. We're going to get ourselves out. Some of these relief programs, okay, that were direct help, okay, included programs like the CCC, which employed young kids. Programs that employed unskilled workers just to get them a job, because most people, guys, want to work. They don't want to be handed money, and especially at this time, the philosophy of the 1930s was that I wanted to take care of myself, take care of my family, and this direct relief was not something that people were willing to just grab. They didn't want to just get a handout. But if the handout was in the form of a job, it was probably more desirable. So a lot of programs basically were created, and we did a project on that to help the relief, recovery, and reform. Those are New Deal programs like the WPA, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and of course a a reform program, the FDIC, which would insure banks. So, give people food, get them a means of taking care of their families, allow for people to retrain, allow for economies to refocus, and then finally at the end, put some laws into place, create some laws that would prevent banks from losing everything, especially people's life savings. A couple of quick Q&A questions to finish it out. All New Deal programs, were they successful? No, they weren't. All New Deal programs were not successful. Some were struck down by Congress as being unconstitutional. Was Herbert Hoover's poor judgment the cause of the Great Depression? Well, the guy got the job just before it happened, the crash of the markets. Can you blame a guy for walking into a job where other people were responsible for it, and then it just goes into to free fall? Probably not just Hoover's fault. I'd say that would be more of a false. Franklin Roosevelt was elected president at the worst possible part of the Great Depression. The answer is was. I would say true. A lot of people would argue that and say no, when it was in free fall, it was the worst part because people were panicking. So he was there at the bottom. So from that angle, yes. Average everyday Americans were a large partly the blame for the Great Depression. The answer for that is, what do you think? Do you think people were responsible for their own actions? Do you think the economy acted on its own? And the answer is no. Guys, that's it. Guys, take this test. Learn a little bit from what I've talked about. Hopefully some of this stuff sank in, but remember, you're going to have to do a little bit of studying on your own. Guys, please be aware of that. Do your best. Don't panic. Remember, there's nothing that panicking is going to do to help you. Remember, emotion can sometimes create a free fall. Don't want to free fall off the edge. So, guys, thank you. I appreciate you being here. I hope this helps you. And, guys, good luck tomorrow on your test. Is it going to be tomorrow? Yes, for you guys, because I'm doing this on Sunday. I'm sorry, guys, but that's the way it worked out. I finally got it working, and it wasn't easy. Later. Goodbye.